What if the greatest epidemic the earth has ever feared has already infected the human race? What if human beings have been deceived into believing that fear is love, that war is peace, and that slavery is freedom?
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
This is the story of your enslavement, how it happened, and how you can finally regain your freedom.
This is Aldous Huxley, a man haunted by a vision of hell on earth. A searing social critic, Mr. Huxley, 27 years ago, wrote Brave New World, a novel that predicted that someday the entire world would live under a frightful dictatorship. Today, Mr. Huxley says that his fictional world of horror is probably just around the corner for all of us. Mr. Huxley, in your new essays, you state that these various enemies of freedom are pushing us toward a real-life brave new world, and you say that it's awaiting us just around the corner. First of all, can you detail for us what life in this brave new world which you fear so much, or what life might be like?
Well, to start with, I think this kind of the dictatorship of the future, I think will be very unlike the dictatorships which we've been familiar with in the immediate past. I mean, take another book prophesying the future, which was a very remarkable book, George Orwell's 1984. Well, this book was written at the height of the Stalinist regime and just after the Hitler regime. And there he foresaw a dictatorship using entirely the methods of terror, the methods of physical violence. Now, I think what is going to happen in the future is the dictators will find, as the old saying goes, that you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. That if you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the ruled. And this they will do partly by drugs, as I foresaw in Brave New World, partly by these new techniques of propaganda. They will do it by bypassing the sort of rational side of man and appealing to his subconscious and his deeper emotions and his physiology even, and so making him actually love his slavery. I mean, I think this is the danger, that actually people may be in some ways happy under the new regime. If you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get consent, you have to get consent, you have to get consent.
We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. And this makes us special among the nations of the earth. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed.
The doctrine of natural rights was most prominently laid out by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence right at the beginning of the document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, he wrote, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is probably the most famous phrase in the English language. But the words that immediately follow may be the most important. Here's what it says. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
What does the word consent mean? Exactly. So what happens when you don't agree?
What just happened to their authority? Gone.
Government of the people and by the people sets a single standard for all who would hold power. You must maintain your power through consent, not coercion. Consent, consent, not coercion, not coercion, not coercion, not coercion.
Anyone born in the Western Hemisphere is a Native American. I'm an Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Sioux Indian Reservation, which is still designated in the Defense Department as prisoner of war camp number 44. You see, Indian people, we don't have any rights, any constitutional protections on the reservation whatsoever. No freedom of speech. No privacy. Well, you Americans are in the same boat. Be that as it may, what has happened after they economically forced us into these prisoner of war camps by destroying our food supply and our right of passage in our own land, they confined us to these, and then they began practicing and perfecting their colonial tactics. What has happened is now America, because of the irresponsibility of your forebears and the irresponsibility of yourselves, you are now on one huge Indian reservation. You know, the American people, for too long, have been an irresponsible, free people. And even generation to generation, as they've become less free, they don't recognize it. They have lost the ability of critical thought. In order to regain critical thought, all you have to do is read your Constitution and then look at the laws that govern you, especially from the federal perspective. It's unconscionable to allow your freedoms to be taken away decade after decade after decade.
Real freedoms are eaten up a little at a time, while government controls are slipped on, while the real power is collected into a few hands. Where government is not limited, no man is free. Change limited government to unlimited government, and our rights would be only what the master planners say they are. No longer the servant of the people, government would be the master of the people. That's the way to change what we have, take all power and all freedoms away from the people and collect everything into the hands of one small group with absolute power.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
I've been following the histories of what's now called the New World Order for many, many years.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
About 100 years ago, this big organization with many branches, they wanted to rule the world basically using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, which also was going to be joined with the US under the Anglo-American establishment. Wrote about the kind of culture and the changes of culture over a 100-year period that they would actually design, implement and bring in.
But if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being, having their differences ironed out and being made amenable to mass production methods on the social level, if you can do this, then you are likely to have a much more stable, a much more lasting society, a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Do you think it's possible somewhere down the road to see a North American Union that might merge into some sort of a global governing body?
One world government?
Yeah.
The goal of this web is to change society in every country to create a global fascist communist dictatorship based on a world government that would dictate to every country, a world central bank that would dictate all world finance in every country, a world currency, just electronic, not cash, a single world currency, a world army to impose the will of the world government, and a microchip population, which people absolutely laughed at when I came out with that, well, I don't know, 15 years ago or more, but no, they're not laughing anything like so much now because all these things are starting to happen.
In 1965, David Rockefeller gave a speech to the International Industrial Conference in San Francisco, where he said, "We have entered upon an era in which interdisciplinary cooperation on a worldwide basis must be the cornerstone of accomplishment. Each of us has the duty to fashion his own contribution to fit the grand design of a global community. For many of us, the marketplace of tomorrow will be no less than this whole planet of Earth. What we do will manifest itself in ways that we cannot foretell, and it will have an unforeseen impact upon individual lives and whole societies. What we are is God's gift to man. What we become is man's gift to God."
These boys tended to publish the world that they saw coming into view, and they wrote it in their own hand, basically. They told us where they were taking the world. And when you start studying these things about the age of 14, 15, or even younger, and reading their books, and you live long enough, you will see that the world has turned out exactly as they planned. This can't be coincidence. And who can really write up a wish list and make it happen globally, unless there is an organization very, very powerful, probably the only organization really on the planet, an organization that can fund all sides, all oppositions, and using this synthesis of conflicting parties, they can literally make the world come into view as they planned.
You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality. One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused.
Manufacturing consent. What is that title meant to describe?
Well, the title is actually borrowed from a book by Walter Lippmann, written back around 1921, in which he described what he called the manufacture of consent as a revolution in the practice of democracy. What it amounts to is a technique of control. And he said this was useful and necessary because the common interests, the general concerns of all people, elude the public. The public just isn't up to dealing with them, and they have to be the domain of what he called a specialized class. Notice that that's the opposite of the standard view about democracy. There's a version of this expressed by the highly respected moralist and theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who was very influential on contemporary policymakers. His view was that rationality belongs to the cool observer, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith. And this naive faith requires necessary illusion.
CNN projects that Barack Obama will be re-elected president of the United States. He will remain in the White House for another 4 years because we project he will carry the state of Ohio. By carrying Ohio, he wins re-election.
What we have to look at is the president is the chief executive officer of this corporation called the United States of America.
What did you just say?
The president is the chief executive officer of this corporation called the United States of America.
What is a corporation? It is one form of business ownership.
It's a group of individuals working together to serve a variety of objectives, the principal one of which is earning large, growing, sustained, legal returns for the people who own the business.
Corporations are artificial creations. You might say they're monsters trying to devour as much profit as possible at anyone's expense.
The Founding Fathers of the United States desired people to have the right to life, liberty, and property, along with the free will to enjoy them and the responsibility to respect the rights of others. After fighting their revolution for freedom from colonialism, the founders were intelligent enough to retain a healthy fear of the similar threats posed by corporate power and wisely limited corporations exclusively to a business role. In the United States of America, up until around the mid to late 1800s, in order to create a company or corporation, you would have to go through the arduous process of earning a charter from a particular state, which was both limited in duration and function, needing to be renewed, but also subject to rules, regulations, and heavy taxes. They were also mandated to serve the public interest, with profit being the result to shareholders who were part of the public. if they exceeded their authority, went against their charter, or went against the public interest. A corporation's charter could be revoked, rendering it invalid, and essentially destroying it in the legal sense. The concept of corporate personhood came about around this time, which quickly gained popularity with business leaders.
The 14th Amendment was passed at the end of the Civil War to give equal rights to black people. And therefore, it said no state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that was intended to prevent the states from taking away life, liberty, or property from black people, as they had done for so much of our history. And what happens is the corporations come into court, and corporation lawyers are very clever, and they say, oh, you can't deprive a person of life, liberty, or property. We are a person. A corporation is a person. And the Supreme Court goes along with that.
Everybody makes a mistake once in a while. Well, maybe you better incorporate the store. Incorporate? Yes, incorporating would give you the big advantage of what you want right now. Limited liability. Look, here's how it works. You start with a group of people who want to invest their money in a company. Then these people apply for a charter as a corporation. The state government issues a charter to that corporation. Now that corporation operates legally as an individual person. It is not a group of people. It is under the law a legal person.
Imperial Steel Incorporated has many of the legal rights of a person. It can buy and sell property. It can borrow money. It can sue in court and be sued. It carries on a business. Imperial Steel, along with thousands of other legal persons, is a part of our daily living. It is a member of our society.
In '47, they wrote a letters patent creating the office of Governor General. The Governor General is the head of this country. Governor General's Act. You go to a Canadian government website and you can actually look up the acts. Okay, you look up the Governor General's Act. And in there, Clause 1, or Clause 2 says, the Governor General of Canada or other Chief Executive Officer, CEO, CEOs are for companies, or administrator carrying on the Government of Canada on behalf and in the name of the sovereign, by whatever title designated is a corporation sole. Okay, a corporation sole is a corporation, except that there's only one individual that holds that title or owns that corporation. Corporation soles actually are used all over the place. The Pope, the office of the Pope is a corporation sole. The office of the King is a corporation sole. The Governor General, Lieutenant Governors, the Catholic Church, all of their bishops and archbishops and cardinals, they all hold corporation soles. Take a look at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. You type in the word Canada, it's listed there. Canada actually has to file with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission every year.
On the Security Exchange Commission in New York, you will find that Canada is registered as a corporation. This corporation lists income tax payments as a stream of revenue for them, and they advertise this, they publish this information.
The United Kingdom is a corporation. Now, up till February of last year, it was United Kingdom PLC. In February, and it's dissolved, and they've never, ever published their accounts. If you want to check that out, go on Companies House, because it's there. But on Dun & Bradstreet, they're now registered as United Kingdom Corporation Limited.
We'll go to Republican. Marty is joining us from California. Go ahead, Marty.
Yes, sir. I was wondering if you were aware of the Act of 1871.
I'm not aware of any particular act in 1871. Is there something that you're referring to in particular?
With no constitutional authority to do so, Congress created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia. It took our organic constitution and replaced it with a corporate constitution. So America is not even a country, it's a corporation. And that's what this health care is about. Control of our schools, our food, everything, every control aspect of our life is under this. And people need to wake up. This is not a bill for the people. This is not even a country, and people need to look into this. This is a corporation. The United States is a corporation, and it's all for the corporations.
Mr. Brown.
I wasn't around in 1871, so I'm not deeply familiar with what the caller is referring to, or the issue of whether or not we're a corporation.
So how did we get into this mess? When we were being formed as colonies, it took a lot of money to get all the supplies and ships and everything over here to form the 13 colonies. British bankers and the British Crown put up a lot of dough. Well, they were happy to put up the dough because as long as they owned the colonies, they knew that the resources of this over here would pay them back a very good return on their investment. But when we broke away from them, now they had no return on their investment, and they had a legitimate claim of debt against us. If we weren't going to be theirs anymore, we needed to repay them for what they had invested to get the colony started. It was a legitimate debt that we owed when we were formed. There are sentences in the Constitution that read that the debts under the Confederacy are continued under this Constitution. So the Constitution is also an agreement of debt to the British and to the French, because we asked the French to help us defeat the British, and they wanted to be paid back for their military expenditures. So we basically were broke when we became a country, and what we didn't know, or I didn't know, is that the bank note when other countries loan to a country is a 70-year note. So the 70-year note comes due when Lincoln is president. They don't have the money under Lincoln to pay off the note. So Lincoln doesn't want to give the public lands of the 13 colonies and the public lands of the Louisiana Purchase back to the Europeans in a foreclosure. He'd rather have that not happen on his watch. So he says to the European bankers, can we renegotiate the loan? And they said, well, we might do that, but we're going to want some upfront money, we're going to want better terms, and we're going to want more collateral. Under Lincoln, there were now 34 republics, many of which were not, part of the original 13, weren't part of the Louisiana Purchase. And he went to them because what the European bankers wanted was they wanted the public lands of all 34 republics to be held as collateral against the new national debt for the next 70 years. Well, when the southern states heard that they were being asked to do this in a war that they hadn't fought in for collateral to bankers, and they didn't like the terms, they basically said they're not going to do it, and they seceded. The real reason for the Civil War and the secession of the states was over the collateralizing of the public lands of those republics. Slavery might have been an issue and various other things. State rights was involved in it, but it was really over the collateralizing of the public lands, and they weren't going to do it.
They were done. They were done being pushed around by basically the international bankers. And they decided to leave the Union. And they had every right to do that because they were sovereign individual nation states. They had the right to leave or break the contract because that's what the Constitution was. They call it a compact, but ultimately it was just a contract between the states. When the southern states walked out of Congress on March 27, 1861, the quorum to conduct business under the Constitution was lost. The only votes that Congress could lawfully take under parliamentary law were those to set the time to reconvene, to take a vote to get a quorum, and to vote to adjourn and set a date, time, and place to reconvene in a later date or a later time. But instead, Congress abandoned the House and the Senate without setting a date, and that's called sine die.
Now Lincoln has a problem. He no longer has a quorum to convene Congress. He can't renegotiate the loan because he has no power to pass any laws.
Congress actually ceased to exist. And in fact, they no longer even had the ability to declare war. So in 1861, on March 27th, Congress disappeared. The lawful Congress disappeared. A little less than a month later, a man that was claiming to be president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, issued Executive Order 1. Why do I say claiming to be president? Because he was no longer president. When the contract called the Constitution ceased to exist, so did the United States. The United States only existed because of that contract, because of the Constitution. So Abraham Lincoln issues Executive Order 1. And what he did was he established a martial rule, basically, over the federal territories. They found a way to actually take back control of all territories, or at least the federal territories. And that's what Abraham Lincoln did on April 15th. Now, everybody knows what April 15th is today. Yeah. It's the day you guys all pay your taxes. 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues the Lieber Code, General Orders 100. What is that? Well, go home, Google it, and then you'll start reading about your government. The General Orders 100, the Lieber Code, is the government we're living under. Remember, the Constitution disappeared in 1861. But in 1863, they needed some way to govern the territories, the federal territories. And they did that through General Orders 100. Go home, look up the Lieber Code, that's L-E-I-B-E-R, the Lieber Code, or General Orders 100. Look it up, and you will see your government. You'll actually read it and go, wow, you know what, there's more things going on in here than I thought. It's a military government. Remember this, the dictatorship was established in 1861 because there was no true Congress and there was no president. Also in 1863, the Supreme Court was abolished. Why would they need a Supreme Court when there was no Constitution? The Article 3 judiciary didn't exist anymore, so why should they pretend they need the Supreme Court? They reestablished a new Supreme Court in the District of Columbia that they controlled completely. But it's not the same Supreme Court. In 1865, the second 13th Amendment was created. Why? Because the first 13th Amendment was the amendment that didn't allow attorneys to hold office. You couldn't have a title of nobility with the original 13th Amendment. That was still part of the original organic Constitution. What did they replace it with? In 1865, the one that everybody talks about being so good. It was the freeing of the slaves. That's what they say. No, that's not what happened. The 13th Amendment was not about freeing slaves. It was about creating a government where voluntary servitude was a possibility. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed. What amendment is that? That's the amendment for the legal right to vote. Legal right, not lawful, legal right to vote. What did they do? They made it so you had to register to vote to participate in their legal system. Did you need to register prior to that? No. You actually had a right to participate. Now you had to register. In fact, what did they say? Voting is a privilege. It is. It's not a right. It's a privilege in their world. And they've made it a privilege. And you know what? What can you do with a privilege that you can't do with a right? Take it away. Also in 1870, something really important happened. The Department of Justice was created. Why? Because there was no Article 3 judiciary. They needed some semblance of law. But it says Department of Justice. Under what does the Department of Justice fall? The executive. The executive branch. It's a department under the executive branch. So who's in control of the legal system? The president. The dictator. This is pretty sad stuff. That was in 1870. And ultimately, who's the top law enforcement officer in their system? The Attorney General? The Attorney General, right? In the Department of Justice?
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't have anything to do with the Supreme Court or anything like that? No, it's the Attorney General. In 1871, then, a new private municipal corporation was created under the Organic Act. And this new private municipal corporation had a charter, a document of incorporation. And that was called the Constitution of the United States of America. It's a private corporate charter. This is not the Article 6 Constitution that says this Constitution, the one that was written in 1789. It was the Constitution that was assembled and put together in 1871. It's not this Constitution that they speak of in Article 6 of the Constitution, the original Constitution. It's a Constitution that resembles this Constitution. When they said this Constitution in Article 6, what are they saying? They're saying this moment in time, this Constitution. It's not a living document. It is very specific. The one they have now is living, because they can change it up and do whatever they want. And very soon they will.
In the 1870s, that's when Congress started giving the banks the right to rule. They start stripping away your freedoms by developing the corporation. You know, a piece of paper. A piece of paper. And of course, you go on to 1913 and the beginning of the 20th century, that's when they officially gave away the power of our economy to the banks.
By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. So what is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 or so figures who attended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law.
Certainly, over the course of its history, the Federal Reserve has caused a lot of problems. For example, right after it was created, it caused the Great Depression.
And on Thursday, October 24th, Black Thursday, collective insanity put in an appearance. In just a few hours, 13 million stocks were suddenly dumped on the market by panic-stricken shareholders who didn't even know at what price they'd sold their shares. After 3 years of intense speculation, Wall Street crashed. And no one was in a position to decide to close the stock market. The president of Wall Street was on vacation in Hawaii. The speculative bubble burst, causing financial panic. Through a domino effect, the whole of the stock market collapsed. The cumulative losses amounted to $30 billion, 10 times the U.S. Federal Reserve budget, and more than the United States had spent during the whole of World War I. In 6 days, average prices went down 50% and kept falling. And what was even more unusual, the stock market crash carried on.
In those days, there was no FDIC, no guaranteed deposits. So when a bank failed, the money supply shrank by the amount of the deposits in the bank. So there were a lot of bank failures, so the money supply was shrinking. And the Federal Reserve did take expansionary actions. They just never took them enough to offset the shrinkage. Well, if the supply of money shrinks, you can't maintain the same level of purchases.
The tremendous crowds which you see gathered outside the stock exchange are due to the greatest crash in the history of the New York Stock Exchange and market.
The shock wave of the stock exchange collapse had not subsided before the effects of the terrible, irreversible spiral of recession began to be felt. American industrial production dropped by half. Thousands of families had to rely on the soup kitchen for food. America's sturdiest strongholds collapsed after the Wall Street crash. It was in stark contrast to the recent period of rapid growth. 1 worker in 5 was unemployed. The population seemed anesthetized. In New York, where every month 17,000 families were put on the streets, hundreds of thousands of unemployed, including many white-collar workers, struggled to survive, trudging through the cold for hours just to get a bowl of soup and a piece of bread.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
In this dramatic context, the elections in November 1932 had symbolic significance. Roosevelt promised to curb the devastating effects of the 1929 crash with measures such as the reform of the banking system, the assurance of a healthy currency, and economic and social aid. But what convinced the voters was, to his despair, his rather hasty promise to repeal the amendment which prohibited the consumption of alcohol, in other words, the end of the prohibition. Franklin D. Roosevelt won with 23 million votes, compared to Hoover, who only obtained 16 million. This landslide victory put the Democrats in power for the next 20 years.
Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States. I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures, or such other measures as the Congress may build out of its experience and wisdom, I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these 2 courses, in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
Preceded by a big show, Roosevelt launched his program to fight the effects of the Great Depression and to give a new boost to the American economy, which had been ravaged since the 1929 stock market crash. $5 billion were allocated to fight unemployment. Over 3 million Americans were hired, rising to 8 million 2 years later. Roosevelt had 15 key laws passed. He established a system of social welfare, pensions, unemployment benefit. He outlawed child labor, discrimination against hiring blacks and women, and he introduced a minimum wage.
A few timid people who fear progress will try to give you new and strange names for what we are doing. Sometimes they will call it fascism, and sometimes communism, and sometimes regimentation, and sometimes socialism. But in so doing, they are trying to make very complex and theoretical something that is really very simple.
Hitler has often protested that his plans for conquest do not extend across the Atlantic Ocean, but his submarines and raiders prove otherwise. And so does the entire design of his new world order. For example, I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the new world order.
It always comes as a shock when people realize that some of the greatest mass murderers of history and greatest tyrants of history were actually supported and funded by very wealthy financiers and forces in the United States and in Great Britain. They sometimes go very closely hand in hand. Everybody knows about the rise of Hitler, but they don't realize that the Nazi Party was funded by many of the banking dynasties that still exist in the United States. They funded him, the large corporations. They went into partnership with some of the German corporations. They called it IG Farben. It was a cartel. And they put up tremendous amounts of money as investment into the Nazi war machine.
Hitler had a dream that his big business should dominate the world. He called his dream the New Order. Foreign big business was weakened during the war, and today American big business is the strongest. And they have a dream to dominate the world.
With the rise and fall of the Third Reich, Europe lay in ruins. Once again, the elite claimed that only global governance could save humanity from certain destruction. And this time, the elite would succeed in setting up their world body. In April of 1945, at the Presidio Naval Base in San Francisco, the United Nations was founded by the victors of World War II. The United Nations complex was then built in New York City on land donated by John D. Rockefeller.
The Royal Institute for International Affairs, which has branches in every country in the world, they set up the United Nations. They said in their own writings, from the earliest times to the present, the world they're bringing in is to be a world where everyone who is born, or would be allowed to be born, would be born to serve the state.
In the early 1900s, Colonel Edward Mandell House had this to say in a private meeting with President Woodrow Wilson.
Soon every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer being unable to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold their security interest over them forever by operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bill of ladings to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation, secured by their own pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser. For not one man in a million could ever figure out our plans, and if by accident one or two should figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America.
If I was to ask you, how do you define person, what would the normal definition out in our community be for that word? Human being. And if we take a look at the dictionary, it says a human being regarded as an individual. That's what we would normally view the word person to be. In law, okay, now we're using their words. Whenever you're dealing with corporations and the government and all that kind of stuff, person means an individual or incorporated group having certain legal rights and responsibilities. Not a human being regarded as an individual, but as an individual or corporation. So they actually said, compare artificial person and natural person. So I did. So I looked it up and I compared them. Artificial person, a legal entity, not a human being. Natural person, a natural person is a human being that has the capacity for rights and duties.
We, as sovereign human beings, are a higher life form than a corporation. In order for them to control us, they had to have parity.
The heart of the Grand Deception, keeping us mired in the world of money, is keeping from us all the fact that almost every country operates with the artificial and natural person merged together as one. That means humans are being given the rights of corporations, i.e. no human rights, and artificial corporate persons are being given the rights and privileges of natural persons, more and more so. And the ones aware of this are profiting from it in a multitude of ways.
What I uncovered was that when a person is registered from birth, it's at that point in time that they are actually being created, or that a legal person is being created and associated with them. And it's kind of like it's at that point where you join a club, and when you join this club, you're given, say, a membership card. The card itself would be your person, as opposed to the human being who is the member of the club.
On the screen there's a little baby. That's Elizabeth Annie Lane. She's a little baby, came into my life about 4.5 years ago. 2 days after the birth of Elizabeth, ministry workers came in, removed her. No investigation, no assessment. Claimed she only had one caregiver. We said, you're wrong, we're a family, we're going to meet you in court. They told us if we tried doing that, they'd see to it. She spent the first 5 years of her life going from foster home to foster home to foster home. Shut me up in court, cost me my baby. Folks, anyone who knows me, shutting me up even for a moment is a bit of a trick. They cost me my baby. I sat down with their Act Black's Law Dictionary on one side, Bouvier's on the other. I had an Old English dictionary. I looked up every single word in there. It took me 3 days. Nothing but toast and tea and a couple of tokes. Took me 3 days and I finally saw it. Have you ever seen these laser pictures? You see nothing until you focus past it, and then a 3D picture pops into your head. Have you seen those? This is exactly what I saw when I did my statute deconstruction. I looked through and I suddenly saw what they were doing. This is their little trick. You are not obliged to register your children. If you do, it is at that point that you're creating a legal entity or a person. You are associating this person with your offspring. You are abandoning ownership or title to that person, and the government is seizing that under the laws of maritime salvage. It becomes their chattel property. They use it as collateral to float loans or to float bonds for loans.
You are a man or a woman, you have a person. My name is John Harris, or John, or My wife calls me lots of other names, but there you go. I shan't discuss them. I exist naturally. Okay? I'm here. I'm real. I was created by divine, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get into any of this sort of, I don't know what it is, so I just say divine, it's the easiest way. But I was created. I'm subject to common law jurisdiction. I must never harm another or cause another loss, any form of loss. I'm free and unlimited ability to contract and settle debt in private and under commercial law. I can basically do as I please as long as I abide by these principles. My person, that's attached to me, is Mr. J. Harris, who's a fictional entity created by the government. Subject to civil policy jurisdiction, must fulfil all duties given to and governed by corporate policy, tax, etc., under statute. Does business in the public sector, or I don't. The creation of the person. When you were born, your mother, father, submitted a birth certificate registration application form. In the formulation of any limited company corporation, there is always a certificate of registration to create its legal personality. Your fictional person, known by Mr., Mrs. or blah, 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 you can see it up there, is created by the same means. When you submit, you are bending to another's will. Okay? So you're bending, you're agreeing to bend to their will. When you register, you are handing over title ownership of whatever you're registering to whoever you are registering it to. You actually physically hand this over. And in doing this, you acknowledge the transferring of that authority. When you apply, it actually means you're begging. And when you beg, it's assumed you know what you're begging for and you know what you're going to give up. That's what this means. Most of the time, you actually volunteer an application. You actually volunteer, you're not made to do it. Did I make you get a credit card? But you submit an application. Everything in this, the whole world is created, it runs on submitting applications for this, submitting applications for that. You get a certified copy, you do not get the original, because that goes somewhere else. This up here, when you actually look at this, you look at this, and you get your own. When you get home, or you get your kids, whatever, get this document and look at it, because it's phenomenal what they've done. The name of the person's being created in capitalised surname. See the surnames in capitals, okay? It's a fiction. This is being created. That fiction is going to be created there. But what they need is, they need another fiction to do it. They have to have a fiction there to do this, who is the informant. You actually inform on your own children. Do you know that? You inform on them. It's brilliant, isn't it? Eh? And your qualification is, you're one of their parents. Mad, mad. And it's capitalised, it's all capitalised. And it is absolutely true. Look at your birth certificate, informant, the qualification needed, and it will say needed, and you inform because you are the father or the mother. What you don't know is that at the bottom, there is a declaration. Now, a declaration is in common law. A declaration is a sworn oath of a man or a woman. And there's a reason that's on the bottom. Because without that man or woman being present, the fictitious mother or father isn't present. Now you're seeing that the person is attached to the human being. But to do this, they need the human being to be there. That's why there's a declaration at the bottom of it. And this, it says it quite simply. You have to be present to represent the person needed to create the new person's legal personality. I know it's a tongue, believe me, it's mind-boggling, but it really is. This is what we found. And it all makes sense. That's the point. This is what I want to tell you about it. And then you register it to a corporation. The General Register Office. Get your birth certificate and lift it up and you'll see GRO. It's a General Register Office. That's who you're registering it to.
Adele is known for being low pro, and now that she's a mother, she wants her baby to be low pro too. The Sun reports that the singer is set to face a penalty of 1,000 British pounds for not registering her son within a 42-day deadline. A source told the newspaper, quote, "Most parents register their baby within a couple of weeks because it's the nice thing to do. There's loads of reasons why parents are late and millions of couples don't bother for ages." But cops won't bang down doors or anything. Adele and her fiancé Simon Konecki will start receiving warning letters within the next few weeks.
Notice requiring a qualified informant to give information for the registration of birth. I'll read you a bit of that just so we can get into the mood. To my wife, at the address, on the date. Under Section 2 of the Births and Deaths Registration Act 1953, the duty is placed on you to give information to me of the particulars required to be registered concerning the above birth within 42 days of the date of that birth. It appears that you have failed to discharge this statutory requirement. Now, therefore, in pursuance of the above Act, I hereby give you notice and require you to attend personally the Register Office, Civic Centre, Newcastle, on the date, to give information to the best of your knowledge and belief of the particulars required to be registered concerning the birth and to sign the register. I shall be in attendance at the place appointed on the following days at the following times. List of dates when the registrar is available for the meeting. If you fail to comply with this requisition, you will be liable for prosecution. And just the bollocks on the bottom, reiterating the same. It's a punishable offence to disobey this statute, etc., etc. So that's what prompted the conversation, and this is what we said. Declaration of denial of consent to register children, strictly private and confidential. We, the authorised representatives for the legal persons, my name and my wife's name, do hereby declare that the following is a verified plain statement of the facts as we perceive them. Let it be known by all concerned, interested and affected parties that 1. We have been granted irrevocable superior guardianship rights over our children by the Creator of the universe. 2. We have accepted irrevocable power of attorney over our children's well-being and property until the 18th anniversary of their birth. 3. 4. On behalf of our children, we have settled their entire legal estate into a private trust which is administered for their maximum benefit. 4. The property settled into said private trust includes without limitation any and all information pertaining to the existence of our children, strictly precluding the disclosure of the details of their birth to any party whatsoever. 5. Any and all disclosures of information pertaining to the existence of our children would represent a breach of the aforementioned private trust, and all those parties responsible for said breaches will be liable for charges of £30,000 sterling or functional currency of the United Kingdom per occurrence. 6. We do not recognise or consent to any perceived obligation, whether statutory or otherwise, to register the births of our children under any circumstances whatsoever. 7. As trustees of the aforementioned private trust, we affirm jointly and without division that we refuse to grant our consent and or authorisation of the registrar or any other individual, organisation or legal entity to register information pertaining to the birth of our children under any circumstances whatsoever. And that's just the declaration and both our autographs and the seal. So, now, what would you imagine happened after we sent that? There's no title on it, but it should be called, "Now look here!" Dear Mrs. Title she doesn't recognise. I have written to you on a number of occasions regarding the registration of the birth of your daughter. Well, that's 30 grand for a start. She was born on the 11th of June 2010 at the place of birth. Well, there's another 30 grand. I have no alternative but to report your failure to register the birth to the Registrar General. That's the Chief Registrar of the entire Crown jurisdiction here. I have been instructed by him to send you a further requisition which is duly enclosed, to send a repeat of the one I've just read you. I note the responses from me, however, and I must emphasise that in accordance with the law, the primary responsibility for the registration of birth lies with the mother of the child, and failure to do so will lead to prosecution. Threatening my wife, trying to get to her, trying to say, well, no, he's going to get you into trouble. Please contact this office immediately with a view to make a convenient appointment. Telephone number is blah blah blah. I urge you to respond in a positive manner to this request, as your daughter will face considerable difficulties in the future if she does not have a birth certificate. I look forward to seeing you in the near future. Signed by the registration officer. So, I wrote well, I was ready with a conditional acceptance. And the terms of this conditional acceptance would basically prove that we weren't granted the things that we were granted, that we acknowledge in the declaration that I just read you, prove that there's a benefit in registering for our daughter and prove that we have consented to the statutory authority that you claim over us. And of course, he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. Now, I also pointed out to them that in the unlikely event that we were found guilty of giving them the information that they are requisitioning from us, they would be liable for the charges that had already been levied. But if we were found guilty by a competent court, we would be more than happy to pay the fine of £2 per occurrence. They didn't write back after that.
I was raised to respect authority, follow the authority, and do as they say. And I think most people are brought up that way. What I've learned, though, is that that authority is based 100% on our consent to being governed. And I found a Supreme Court ruling that says that the consent of the governed is a foundational principle of democracy. Now, what's consent? Does that imply that you have a choice whether you're going to agree to that or not? And I would suggest that the answer is yes. So we all have free will choice to consent to being governed. When we do that, then we've given them permission to use their authority over us. So when we used our free will to apply for or register for something, we gave them permission to create a corporation to interact between the man and the system. And it's that corporation that the system acts upon, but because we don't know who we are, we assume or we think that that is us. So when you take a look at your credit card or take a look at your driver's license or your birth certificate or any of that kind of stuff, a lot of people, and including myself, thought that that was actually me. And that's not true. So when the courts are acting upon it, all they can really act upon is the corporation. And the only reason they can act upon the man is because we agree to be the representative of that corporation and bind ourselves to the terms and conditions of that agreement. But we can say no at any time.
This is what they don't want you to know. You can actually just say no to them. Somewhere along the lines, we lost it. When we were kids, when you were a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old child, you had what it takes to say, no, you are not the boss of me.
You're not the boss of me. Yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, you are.
But somewhere in high school, we've lost it so that now we're just, oh, everyone's the boss of me. The court, the government, every police officer. What happened so that we lost the ability to say, you're not the boss of me?
I think they did it when they got everyone to become a government employee. And then that's this way where normally they would be our servants and we would be in charge of them. They tricked us all into getting social insurance numbers. These numbers identify us as a government employee. We're receiving benefits, as they call them, and therefore we are bound by the rules that bind all government employees. And so they've tricked us. We're a nation of people employed by the government, bound by the rules that the government makes, but only because we are employed by them.
You are all sinners. You have a social insurance number. Do you know what that means?
You sin. You're collateral to them.
Close. It was a rhetorical question. They have ruled, they identify it. When you go in there, they call that social insurance number an employee identification number. If you want to pay into the Canada Pension Plan, you need a social insurance number. The courts have ruled payment into a pension plan is prima facie evidence of employee status. Only employees pay into a pension plan. They'll tell you you need this number to work legally in Canada. Change the in to for and you're closer to the truth. You're working for Canada. If someone tells you, I work legally in Walmart, are they not also then automatically working legally for Walmart? The fact is, your social insurance number means you are all government agents. When I hear you complaining about the government, I don't hear citizens complaining about their lawful government. I hear employees bitching about their employer. You go into Walmart, a Walmart employee, he's going to have certain rules that he's not allowed to do things. He can't come in and have alcohol on his breath. Who says you can't go into Walmart after having a couple of beer? You don't work there. All of these rules that they use, the Income Tax Act, that's why you have to pay income tax. If you go to a temporary job placement agency, they will set you up with a job, but now you have to pay them a portion of what you earned. Why? Because you were working as an agent for them. That's why you have to pay income tax to the federal government. You are working as a federal agent under a contract for service instead of a free man under a contract for hire.
Please? You just want me to come running up to kick that ball so you can pull it away and see me land flat on my back and kill myself. This time you can trust me. See? Here's a signed document testifying that I promised not to pull it away. It is signed. It's a signed document. I guess if you have a signed document in your possession, you can't go wrong. This year I'm really gonna kick that football. Peculiar thing about this document, it was never notarized.
I've become tax exempt. I entered a process with HMRC where I proved beyond doubt administratively in a process without court, even though they were threatening me with court, if I didn't fill in 7 years worth of tax returns and pay their late filing penalties, they were going to take me to court and ask for a charging order against whatever property I have to repay this alleged debt. Much along the same lines as why we made the declaration with regard to our daughter, I decided that I wasn't going to pay a penny in tax or late filing penalties, and I wasn't going to give any tax returns when I returned to the UK under any circumstances, and I was going to see how long it took for them to find me. Well, they found me and they sent me demands for a couple of years, which I initially ignored, and then I wrote to them explaining that I didn't believe that I had a liability, that they couldn't prove that I had one, and I made a declaration, it was called Declaration of Cancellation of Tax Registration. And in this declaration, and all of this is on Free the Planet, I declared that there was no evidence that proved beyond reasonable doubt that I could be deemed a taxpayer. I sent them an opportunity to cure their dishonour of the conditional acceptance that I already told you about, because they failed to provide the evidence that I was a taxpayer. And then they sent this one. Further to my colleague, Mrs. Langdon's letter to you of the 18th of March, I write now in response to your letter of the 9th of March. Initially, I would advise you that both the presumption and time deadline stated in the penultimate paragraph of your letter are not accepted, as I will explain. I am sure that you are as keen as I am to bring this matter to a swift conclusion. With this in mind, I will answer the points in your letter which are relevant to the matter in hand. This is the head of the Debt Management Office, by the way. You have been sent self-assessment tax returns for the years shown at the head of this letter because you are registered with HM Revenue and Customs, not anymore, as a self-employed person. I can see that you have filled in self-assessment returns in the past, for example, for the years 2001 to 2, 2002 to 3, and 2003 to 4, in which you have completed a self-employment page describing your trade as variously, etc., etc. There is no indication on any of these returns that you have ceased self-employment, and this is why you correctly continue to be issued with returns. Because you have not completed or filed these returns, you have been charged penalties upon which interest continues to accrue. Furthermore, when a taxpayer fails to meet his obligation to file a return, HMRC has the power to raise a revenue determination to estimate the liability due and unpaid. This determination is recoverable in law and can only be superseded by filing the return. There is no right of appeal against a revenue determination. And there's the list, please. The legislative basis upon which these actions are based can be found at the following points in the Tax Management Act 1970, Section 28C, Section 93.2, Section 93.4. There is no requirement in legislation for HMRC to provide the material evidence requested in your letter, and this vitiates the presumption in the penultimate paragraph of your letter. If this is still unclear, you may wish to seek advice from a qualified legal professional. You should now complete these returns, yada yada yada. Okay, so I just sent them a reminder. And I then received something a little bit unexpected. After the reminder that they just sidestepped all of the issues, and that they couldn't prove that I was a taxpayer, and that they couldn't prove that I'd had a benefit from anything I'd paid, and that they couldn't prove that anything I'd paid hadn't been spent on the illegal wars, I got sent from a different office the tax return for that year. So I sent it back. Refused for cause. That means at a 45-degree angle, in red, I printed on, because I got a template made on my computer, block capitals, red ink, refused for cause, without dishonour, without recourse, without prejudice, on the front, and I sent it straight back to them. I didn't hear anything back for a month. And then I got this. This is from a different office again. We have looked at your last tax return and do not propose to send you any more returns in the future. However, if there have been any changes in your financial circumstances since the information given in that return, they mean my declaration, or they change in the future, you must let us know straight away. That's pretty much it. The rest is just blabber. Nothing. Meaningless. In other words, they accepted that I was no longer liable for tax. I just proved that tax is voluntary. You have to volunteer to be a taxpayer. They presume that you are until you rebut it, or it's well and truly rebutted. Because that didn't come on its own. That came with another letter from a different office. Because you see, in the declaration I denied, when I cancelled the tax registration account, in the letter I denied HMRC the right to create any more negotiable instruments in my name.
And in the end, they backed down completely and they said they were no longer going to come after me for tax returns. They cancelled my account upon my instructions and they refunded me the balance of my tax account, which I didn't even know existed. Now, it was only a little under £200, but that's what happened when I cancelled my account, which is my contract with HMRC. They can now no longer take anything from me because I'm classed as having no income, so I can't be taxed.
We have natural, God-given rights. But this system has persuaded us to waive those rights for the benefit of this society. These benefits aren't benefits. They're made to seem like benefits, but they're all liabilities. They all work against us. The system isn't for us. The system is to allow a wealthy elite, a parasitic elite, to continue in their lap of luxury, supported by all of us working our asses off to keep them where they are. That's it. No more than that. We've given up our rights, mainly because we don't know what our rights are. And this is where the freemen come in, because we're trying to make sure that those rights don't disappear.
The policeman on the corner is a good symbol for law. Like the policeman, law directs us in doing the right things to live together in harmony. And law forbids us from doing the wrong things that tend to destroy that social harmony. But law is more than the policeman on the corner, more than the courthouse where our laws are enforced, more than the jail where lawbreakers are punished. Law is one of three forms of social control which regulate our daily lives. Custom, what we usually do. Moral code, what we should do. And law, what we must do. Now, just how do these social controls affect us? Law is a whole body of rules for our conduct made by representatives of the people and enforced by established means. We all know that there are many don'ts in the laws we make. Law prohibits what the majority decide is wrong. Law directs what is agreed to be right. The town or city in which you live has laws which control you. There are state laws passed and enforced by state governments. And the federal government in your name makes laws which affect you. And we are hopefully working toward a still higher level of law, the law of nations united for world peace. You are guided by all these laws and controls.
What is the law? What laws apply to every single man on this earth? Because they often say no man is above the law. Okay, so which law are they talking about then?
In this little game that they've got us playing, there is a hierarchy to law. If you look on the right-hand side, natural law is the epitome. That's the top. Natural law is essentially your rights and duties to those whom you love. Imagine for a moment you're in a forest. You live there with your family, no one else is anywhere around. Your rights and duties to your family essentially boils down to the natural law. It's all about love. The natural law, what law is all about, it's all about fundamentally love. Below that you will have commercial law. Let's suppose in this forest there's now not just you with your family, there's another family, you live 100 miles away. Once a month you want to trade some of your berries for his fish. The commercial law now will deal with your transactions. And these commercial law has to do with trust. You need to be able to trust the people you're engaging in commercial actions with. Below that you have a common law. The common law, imagine for a moment in this forest where before you only had 2 people, now you got hundreds and thousands of families living here. You need a certain system, a certain structure that's going to allow all of these people the protection that commercial law will afford them. It boils down to compassion, and it boils down to the Magna Carta, which essentially said that the government within this structure are bound by their own rules.
Everybody's familiar with Robin Hood. King John, you know, the tyrant, was actually real. The problem with King John is that he did not know how to fight a war, and he had no land to his name. So he ran to the Pope in 1213 and asked Pope Innocent III for some help. And what he did is he actually turned over the whole Kingdom of England to the Pope in return for support from the Pope so that he could fight his wars. So that little document essentially turned King John into the Pope's vassal, which means that he promised to be loyal to the Pope, and the Pope then owned everything in England. A couple years later, his barons cornered him and stuck a knife to him and said, you know what, we're not happy with the way you're treating us, we want you to sign this Magna Carta.
But if I sign this, I shall be no king. You have given me 24 overlords.
These 24 will see that you carry out the terms of the Magna Carta. You have no choice, King John, but to sign.
So the Magna Carta was the basis of English law.
That's right, Jet. And the basis of American law as well. The English Magna Carta became the model for the American Bill of Rights.
This is the founding document for our human rights within our country, within Great Britain, within the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, any crown colony, their legal systems are based on this document.
All of this side of the hierarchy of law, this all deals with your body as a human being. It has to do with your rights and your responsibilities and your duties as a human being in a common law jurisdiction. On the other side, you have statutes, you have regulations, bylaws, and orders. They don't act on your body at all. They only act upon your person. They only act in equity. And here's the thing. People who exist in equity and act in equity cannot exit equity. Grab something that's existing only in law, drag it into it, and then try affecting it. Equity is a bitch, as they say. And you can only enter into it voluntarily. No one can ever force you. That's why they're using applications, registrations, and submissions in your signature.
A common misconception among people is that any rule or regulation that governs them falls under one category, law. But there are many other forms of law that people abide by without realizing that they simply do not apply to them. One of the predominant beliefs in modern culture is that licenses, permits, registrations, and other forms of documentation are required to operate motor vehicles, use public roads, build structures and establishments, engage in free enterprise, and much more. Sadly, these beliefs are based on little to no investigation whatsoever, and are false. Driver's licenses, vehicle registrations, auto insurance forms, building permits, gun permits, work permits, tax filing documents, birth and death certificates, traffic citations, and many other forms of documentation that were once believed to be absolutely necessary only apply to persons.
The corporate employees must get a man or a woman to represent the person before a contract can be formed. That's absolutely true. They will ask you your name, they'll ask you your address. When they get your address, they've got joinder. Because there could be 100,000 John Harrises in England. They need that address to get joinder, so they can prove who you are. The second you do that, the human being has said, yes, I'm the person. Contract is an agreement between two or more persons that creates or modifies an existing relationship. Offer, consideration and acceptance must be there or exist for a contract to be made. So when we look at the word statute, I know I like this one, a legislative rule of society given the force of law by the consent of the governed. And I ask you, please, if you could explain to me where in that definition taken from Black's Law Dictionary that says that statute is law. It's given the force of law, which means it will apply to you if you consent. What does the word consent mean? Exactly. So what happens when you don't agree? It isn't law. Can't be given the force of law.
You read in the paper a new law has been passed. They get you thinking that these statutes are laws. Statutes are not laws. If you look it up, you'll find that the definition of a statute is a legislated rule of society given the force of law. It's a law, it's a rule that has the force of law within a structured society because somebody gave it that force. Remember, we're all equal here. Who can give those words the force of law? Only you. You have decided to give those statutes the force of law within your societal structure. A society, if you look at the definition of that, it's a number of people joined by mutual consent to deliberate, determine, and act for a common goal. Your consent is required for any statute to have the force of law, and you can spot these. They'll have the word act right in the title. Point out the word act to any government agent asking or claiming authority over you. Say, what exactly does that word right there mean? And you will be 2 steps away from consent. Consent is not assent. You don't have to make a positive affirmation in order for them to achieve consent. Your silence and inaction will raise the appearance of consent. Consent can be achieved when you do nothing.
A policeman, a human being, his duty under common law of this land is to serve and protect every individual in this land. You've heard Albert say this today. That is his duty. That is what he does his job for, to serve and protect and never, ever delay right or justice to any individual in this land. That's their job. They must uphold the common law. But they have a fiction attached to them called a police officer. Now, if you look at the word officer, it comes from the corporate world. What's a CEO? Chief Executive Officer. It's all officers. They're unbelievable. This man on my right is who enforces statutes on you. This man protects you. But the trouble is, the boys in blue, who I've got all the admiration in the world for because I've got a lot of friends in the police force, don't know the difference. They don't know the difference anymore. And some of them didn't know the difference in the first place because they're being told wrong. They're not being told about this bit, they're only being told about this bit.
Some of the things that I do when I'm talking with a cop, first of all, I never give them, if they ask for my name, I say, well, legal or lawful, I want to know. And I don't have a legal one. You ask them, under what authority are you acting? If they try saying, I'm a cop, so what? Under what authority are you acting? If they try saying it's against the law, and I've had them do that before, oh, it's against the law. What law? The Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. That's an act and a statute, not a law. Are you aware gross negligence is equal to fraud? They hate that. These people have a duty to understand and to distinguish between statute and law. They've been dealing with us for so long with people who are essentially ignorant that we don't even distinguish between statute and law, so they assume that you are going to be there. They'll say, oh, you broke the statute, you broke a law, I want to give you a ticket. And then they'll say, I need to see your ID, and if you don't show me ID, I'm going to arrest you for obstruction of justice. I've had cops do this to me, SkyTrain cops. The fact is, though, until they see ID, they have absolutely no evidence of the existence of a person who is liable under the statute. So they're putting the cart before the horse. They're saying, I see a human being, the act says person must produce a proof of fare. You're a person, I'm giving you a ticket, now you have to show me your ID so I can give you a ticket, because they've been told if you don't see ID, you can't give a ticket. They know this, but they're putting the cart before the horse. Ask them flat out, is this a transaction of a security interest? If he says, I don't know, then you say, well, clearly it can't be. You cannot engage in a transaction of a security interest in ignorance. So you say, okay, fine, so this isn't a transaction of a security interest. If it is, you need knowledge thereof. Since it's not a transaction of a security interest, you will not be generating any obligation upon me to pay or perform, so why am I talking to you? Have a good day. If they say, yes, it is a transaction of a security interest, you need my consent for that, and I do not consent to your transaction of a security interest. If they try enforcing statutory obligations or restraints upon you, ask them. They'll say, oh, well, let me see your ID. Well, what evidence do you have at this point right now that you are actually dealing with a person who is subject to that act? Until they see the ID, they don't know. And I've heard stories. There was a guy who, he had his card, he got stopped, he had a driver's license. The cops are there and they're asking him, do you have a driver's license? And he's playing with them, and, you know, I'm not producing that. I don't know why you stopped me. Nah, nah, nah. Cops are totally nice to him. He's about to get, he says, you know, I was this far to getting out of there. They were just going to give up, and then finally the cop asked me one last time, you sure you don't want to just show me your ID? I mean, it makes it, okay, fine. The moment they saw it, right out the window. They dragged him right out the window. They put the cuffs on him, took him away. He was this close. But once they saw that there was a person they could act upon, they acted, and they will act very, very quickly, especially if you're being pokey with them. Try not to be too pokey against the guys with guns. That's one of the things that's helped me get this far. I mean, there are some things you can't say to the cops. If they come and they ask you for driver's license, or if they say, do you know why I stopped you? It's usually not a good idea to say something like, because you're a power-hungry, tax-collecting tool of the state bully with a badge and a gun, and by stopping me, you get to exercise your powers, propping up your own frail ego, allowing you to believe for a short period of time you're not half the loser you really are. You don't say stuff like that. It's not going to help you. That's not the truth. These cops, for the most part, these are decent human beings who are trying and who would come and risk their life for you. They could give you a ticket and argue with you about the law 1 minute. 5 minutes later, they could be pulling you out of a burning wreck, and they would put their life on the line. And when you bring them this energy, instead of saying, oh, fuck you, copper, if you treat them, hello, peace officer, I love you. What can they do? You know, and if you can learn to distinguish between a law enforcement officer and a peace officer, hold them to their peace officer status and refuse to allow them to act as a law enforcement officer against you because they have nothing to enforce, they love it. Oh man, good for you. I don't have to be I'm not your nanny, you're good? Okay, fine, I get to go find some real criminals.
If somebody gets in your face and calls you a cocksucker, I want you to be nice. Okay. Ask him to walk, but be nice. If he won't walk, walk him, but be nice. If you can't walk him, one of the others will help you, and you'll both be nice. I want you to remember, it's nothing personal.
Uh-huh. Being called a cocksucker isn't personal?
No. It's two nouns combined to elicit a prescribed response.
You are dealing with a human being. They are just human beings. They'll tell you, I'm an agent for the government, I'm a peace officer, I'm this, I'm that. No. You are a human being in a common law jurisdiction, and that's all there is to it. That's first and foremost, and I'm not forgetting that. If you remember that, they have to remember that. The key thing about remembering this is you can remember a couple of things. Yes, you can affect them. You can they will respond to emotion. They will respond to threats. They'll respond to a baseball bat in the bottom of their knee. They will respond. They will also respond to love, compassion, and truth. They are human beings, and if you treat them with the dignity that all human beings are worthy of, they will respond as a human being as well. Don't look at them as anything more than simply a human being using a tool. And the tool that they are using is words. The good thing about these words is that if they start losing some of them, they lose all their authority. If someone comes up to you and points to a body of words and says, this body of words gives me authority over you, and you say, really? What does that word right there mean? And they say, I don't know. What just happened to their authority? Gone. They have to know what the words in their own mandates mean. And this is where we have what their tool that they use against us, now we're going to use it against them, because some of these words are very deceptive.
The alphabet has only 26 letters. With these 26 magic symbols, however, millions of words are written every day.
I'm sure many of you have read court rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada. In a free and just society, this might be acceptable, Ask yourself this. What's the name of your society? Do you have one? Now, if you can't even tell me the name of your society, and you know a statute is a legislated rule of a society which has been given the force of law, and you don't have a society, why do these acts have any force of law over you? Believe it or not, all of these statutes, they are a legislated rule of a particular society which have been given the force of law, but that's the law society. All of these rules are the rules for the law society, and you can prove it. Only they can make the statutes, the regulations, or the orders. You are not allowed to pen these. If you go into court, they claim that only they may use these documents or these words, only they can claim complete understanding of these words. Unless you're a member of that society, you cannot understand these words. Why? Because societies have a number of powers. As a society, you can generate and create your own rules, and no one who is not a member of that society is going to have a say in creating those rules. You can claim that no one but a member of that society can understand those rules because you can actually create your own language as a society if you want. And you can do this by taking an existing language, let's call it English, and you can change just a few words, not tell anyone else how those words have been changed, and guess what? You've got an entirely new language that appears to be English, but it's not, and only they know it.
Legalese is such a language. In English, it is English, but some words have very, very different meanings. Example, legalese is the language of the law society. Check it out for yourselves. Must is synonymous with the word may. When someone says to you from a corporation, you must, they're actually giving you a choice because they can't force you. They're not allowed to because it's not law. It's only policy. Summons is synonymous with invitation. When you get a summons from a court of supposedly law, you actually are being invited to a corporate place of business to discuss how much money you're going to give that corporate place of business. And you won't get an 8 for it either. Understand is synonymous with stand under. If I say to you, do you understand? And you say yes, that means you stand under me, which means you've given me authority over you. It's as simple as that. It's so simple. But this is a language you don't know. You don't know you've been spoken to by this language. Know who you are. If you go to court, which I've had a few accountants with, to say the least, it's a corporate place of business. And they will immediately ask you for your name. Okay? Your name. They will even presume to know who you are, and they will ask you as such. They would say to me, Mr. Harris. Mr. is the title of something with legal personality status. I was named by my parents, but I wasn't called Mr. John Harris. Well, I don't think so. If I reply yes, guess what I've agreed to represent? A man cannot be acted upon by statutes, nor can a woman, a human being, a living soul. These only apply to the fictional entity which is the legal personality, i.e. Mr. John Harris in full caps or Mr. J. Harris. Every title in this land is a fiction. Common law v. statute, rules and policy. I like this. The only basic principles that any people of any nation need to adhere to are those of natural law, which are mirrored in common law. Never harm or cause loss. It covers every eventuality. There is nothing it doesn't cover. Nothing. Common law applies to a man or a woman, a living soul. Statute rules apply to the person only when the man or woman consents to represent the person. Consent can be given in inaction or action. Within statute rules, you will just receive a summary judgment. That's what you get in the courts of law, or supposedly. But it's called summary judgment. And what summary judgment is, it doesn't matter if whatever court you go into, as long as that court's going to make money from someone, because that's all it's about. And there's a reason they want to extract that revenue from you. There is such a reason.
We have started to realise that we are slaves in this system. The system is there to milk us like cows.
Money is a tool that we must believe in to serve them. Karl Marx was quite right. He was one of their boys who was set up to set up the dialectic. And he was quite right when he said that money is a tool of the elites. It's essential that the people who stop bartering or working for themselves and start using money as a means of exchange, which then can be taxed back from them, are becoming slaves. Because under law and legality, for 1,000 years, no one could take anything from you. Money represents your food, your home, everything. When it's taxed back from you, they're creating a form of slavery. Therefore, it's essential that the workers believe in money.
It's simply to maintain the illusion that they have control over your life, your fortune, and your freedom. Because your fear and their ability to take from you something you deem to be valuable. And that is money. Yeah? Do we all believe money is valuable? We all use it every day, don't we? Yeah? And we all believe it's got some worth. These pieces of papers and coin has some worth.
Frank Hamilton is depositing some money, and also a check, his paycheck. On the deposit slip, the amount of the money and the check are added together, just as though it were all money. And yet, a check is not money. It is an instrument for the transfer of credit, which is a substitute for money. On his job, Mr. Hamilton himself is paid not in money, but by check. He deposits his paychecks in the bank. He receives no money for his work. But in the bookkeeping department of the bank, the amount of the deposit is credited to Mr. Hamilton's account. In other words, it is added to the amount of his credit in the bank. Meanwhile, the amount of the check is deducted from the amount of credit available to Mr. Hamilton's employer. Thus, the check has served as an instrument for the transfer of credit from the Central Manufacturing Company to Mr. Hamilton. By means of these various credit instruments, a bank deals much more in credit than it does in money.
Private banks are creating what we call money out of fresh, bloody air and then charging us interest on it. And it works like this. If you go into a bank and you borrow $50,000, what does the bank do? Does it move precious metal anywhere? I mean, what does it do? What it does is it types into your account $50,000. And from that moment, you start paying interest on $50,000 that has never, does not, and will never exist. Fresh air, theoretical money called credit.
A bank not only assists in the transfer of credit, but it also creates credit. To see how this is done, we'll follow Richard Morton into the loan department of the bank. Since Mr. Morton is known to the bank as a reliable man, the banker can feel reasonably certain that Mr. Morton will be able to repay the loan when it comes due. So the banker is glad to make the loan. Mr. Morton writes out a promissory note. This is a promise to pay the money back to the bank at a certain time, in this case, in 30 days. As so often happens in a bank, no money changes hands. The amount Mr. Morton has borrowed is simply credited to his account, minus the interest which the bank charges for this service. Now Mr. Morton has obtained his loan. He has increased his bank credit by nearly $2,000. But this credit was not transferred to him from some other account, so where did it come from?
Laws have been passed called fractional reserve lending that allow banks to lend at least, and my goodness, it's at least 10 times what they have on deposit. So when you put $1 in a bank, that bank can now lend 9/10 that it does not have. Fresh air, figures on a screen. Not only that, you borrow $50,000 from a bank. What does it do? It types into your account $50,000. Okay, now you're paying interest on it. But you take $10,000 and you say, I'm going to buy that car, and you give $10,000 to the guy who owns the car to buy the car off him. Now the guy who's received your $10,000 that was created out of nothing in the original $50,000 now goes and deposits the 10 grand in his own bank. Now that bank can lend 10 times the 10 grand that was created out of nothing in the first place. This is what's going on. And then if you follow one loan, $50,000 or whatever, you follow that through the banking system, and that one loan allows the banking system as a whole to create phenomenal amounts of non-existent money we call credit from that original non-existent credit loan. This is how the banking system, ladies and gentlemen, have taken the world over. Why wouldn't it when they can do that?
They create money out of nothing, and then they loan it to you and to me and to corporations and other countries and so forth, and then they collect interest on it. Now just think about that. Collecting interest on nothing. Not too shabby. Why didn't I think of that, you know? Well, if we tried that, we'd go to prison, wouldn't we? Because we didn't write the Federal Reserve Act.
And there's another little scam here. All written in on purpose, cold calculated. When you go into a bank and you borrow $50,000, the bank creates, even in this theoretical, ludicrous way, $50,000. But you're not paying back $50,000, you're paying back $50,000 plus interest. The interest is never created, even as credit, which means a simple fact. At any point in time, coldly calculated, designed to be, there is never anything like enough units of exchange, money, in circulation to pay back all the principal on the debt and all the interest on the outstanding debt.
The elite have all the money in the world. They own all the resources in the world. They don't need money, but they need us to believe it's the only thing that we must use. Today, the power of the purse, as they call it at the top, is being used to the maximum.
In 1938, Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King nationalized the Bank of Canada, giving control of the Canadian currency to the people of Canada. Although the issuance of currency is held solely by the Bank of Canada, the creation of credit through the issuance of loans is still largely controlled by private chartered banks. As part of the Bank of Canada's charter, the government can borrow up to 50% of its own money from the Bank of Canada at 0% interest. The other half of the interest is paid back into the government, allowing for the financing of our own infrastructure, such as the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway. Because of Bilderberg member Paul Martin, Canada now borrows its money from the private chartered banks at the going interest rate, effectively handing over the usury and interest to private corporations. Prior to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, all banks had to hold an 8% reserve, meaning they could lend out the same money 12.5 times through credit and loans. Mulroney dropped this to a 0% reserve, allowing private banks to loan as much money as they want, simply by entering a new line on a ledger. Currently, the Bank of Canada is only responsible for 5% of the actual debt created in the form of currency. The private chartered banks, such as Royal Bank of Canada and TD Bank, own the remaining 95% of all debt. Think of how much control this amounts to when you consider all of the digital payment and loan options used today, such as credit cards, debit cards, internet payments, RFID chips, smartphone purchases, and even biometric identification, which is now used in India for bank withdrawals.
The more I discovered the machinations that the international bankers go through to control us, the more I realized that the theft of our efforts, our resources, and our labors was phenomenal, was colossal. At that point, I got introduced to a graph that the Auditor General in Canada in 1993 put out, which showed the phenomenal theft that happens as a result of the power of interest and the sleight of hand economics of compounding interest. And I discovered this graph at that time, which I would like to show you here, of the degree of the theft that was taking place in Canada. Now, this is the Auditor General's report of November 1993, and here in Canada this would put the sponsorship scandal to absolute shame. The sponsorship scandal does not compare with the theft that happens when a government, instead of borrowing from itself, creating its own money, which only the government has the right to create, they give it over to private entities like the international banks or the private banks. The government prints a bond, the private banks then turn that bond into printed dollars, and then the government borrows those printed dollars back according to the bond. And from way back, 1867 to 1992, when this report was prepared, Canada had to borrow for real spending no more than $37 billion. Yet, in 1993, our national debt stood at $423 billion. $386 billion of that was simply interest on interest. Now, if this isn't an unnecessary theft, I don't know what is.
Do you realize, I think, GST alone collects more than that? Okay, we're talking in a country that has hundreds and hundreds of taxes. We got one tax alone that would cover the cost, the overcost of borrowing. Everything else is for what? For somebody else. Okay, and that is why they created this elaborate game to get money out of your pocket so it could go in theirs and keep you frustrated as there's nothing we can do. Okay? Here's this other chart from Bill Abrams. I believe he's the one that put it together, and it's all sourced from Statistics Canada. It was a very good chart. And as I was listening to him and going through it, I started doing some research, chronological research as when events happened in life. And sometimes that allows us to get a really big picture of what's going on.
I was born in 1928, and I recall the Depression years. And the Bank of Canada was created, as I said, in 1934. The war started in 1939, and the government then was producing all the money that was needed to build the factories, to build the airplanes, and to build the ships.
Okay, 1942 was the middle of the World War II. Do you see any economic spike in our debt? Absolutely nothing. How are we able to finance a world war right in the middle of it without having an economic spike? Why? Because we borrowed it from ourselves without interest. Take a look further in history. 1944, we introduced the Family Allowance Program. There's a very nice humanitarian-based social program. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, we borrowed it interest-free from our own bank. 1952, old age security. Very humanitarian. We've taken care of the children, we've taken care of the elderly. Old age security 1952. Was there a spike? Absolutely none. Again, why? We borrowed it from ourselves interest-free to finance these programs. 1954, the St. Lawrence Seaway. Probably a multi-billion-dollar project. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, because we can borrow from the Bank of Canada to fund infrastructures without placing ourselves into debt. Okay? 1966, the universal health care. Boom, where's the spike? Another humanitarian program. So between the St. Lawrence Seaway and this was this whole time frame, there's too much happening. Schools, universities, hospitals, everything to develop a very strong humanitarian-based nation, and boom, no spike at all. Absolutely no spike. 1967, Canada Pension Plan was passed. In 1974, we have this increased pressure from the private bankers. They wanted control. That's when Canada plugged into the G7. Come on, be part of the boys club. We'll take care of you. You know, forget about the people. They just, you know, they're sheep. You got to ask yourself, okay, the private bankers been around. This game has been around since, I say, the U.S. got trapped by the private bankers in 1913. Why did they leave us alone for so many years? Because what they were doing was building their profit-making machine. Okay? Because they knew they were setting the stage. As much as we were more free, and as much as the money was keeping in our pocket, the trap was being set. Imagine what would happen if we could have kept those times going. But they knew what they were doing, and because we fell asleep. And so in '74, they started putting pressure on the government to take over the financing of the country. All the debts, all the bonds or whatever, the debts that we held to finance our country, creating no national debt, the banks, the private bankers started taking over those loans. And the second they took them over, they started adding interest to them. And there's the start of it. There's the reality of it. Okay, so after that point, government funding started coming from private banks at interest. That in itself is self-evident of the reality that can exist. Because right now we're living in the second part of that.
Economists around the world are struggling to break free of the clutches of the financial crisis. But a 12-year-old Canadian knows what needs to be done. Victoria Grant took the internet by storm overnight after a video of her slamming Canada's banks for robbing the people went viral.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. In conclusion, it has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a complicit government. What will we do to stop this crime? What will we do to ensure that the next generation will live free and clear of the debt-based economy that enslaves them to the banks? Margaret Mead said the following, and I hope that all of you remember this. Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
This is the real truth. You're the currency, not money. You are. Because without you, this country grinds to a halt. Because the principal workforce of any machine or any corporation or any company are slaves. And they have to give you something to believe in, so you will do that work and you will not question. And to make it valuable, they're going to stiff you with as many fines that are make-believe to make you give over that worthless piece of paper to another corporation just so you believe it's real.
They're hiding it, they're camouflaging it, they're not talking about it. Coordination of international regulation. What they are going to do is to put our Fed and our SEC under the control, in effect, of the IMF.
Oh, come on.
They're
You
gonna
believe
take,
they'll do this?
That's what was in the draft agenda. They call it coordination of regulation. What it really is putting the American economy under international regulation.
Yeah.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
Conspiracy
government.
theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
Yeah, well, when Geithner,
It's happening.
When Geithner said he would be open to the idea of a global currency last week, those conspiracy people had said and suggested that for years.
right.
You're not wrong.
When massive foreign trade deals are made, they are done in U.S. dollars, which serves as the world's reserve currency. Now the UN is backing a plan to change all of that and create a new global currency. If that's the case, what does it mean for you?
Slavery has always existed in one form or another. There's different ways to have slavery. You can either get a bunch of henchmen, force a tribe into obeying you and being your slaves. That's a lot of force. But you have to feed them, etc. Or you can allow them to keep so much of their earnings for themselves, to maintain themselves, and take off all the rest to supply the elite and the structure of the system over them.
The question is, do we all work for central bankers? That's what I want to address to our guest tonight. Is this global governance at last? Is it one world, the central bankers in charge?
To answer your question, we are absolutely slaves to central banks.
Well, what's the definition of a slave? A person who is a legal property of another and is forced to obey them. Or a person who is excessively dependent upon or controlled by something. Okay? So if you're dependent on something, are you free?
No.
No. If you're controlled by something, are you free?
No.
No. So if we want to be free, then maybe we need to get rid of our dependencies and the controls in our life.
Have you ever played Snakes and Ladders? Imagine Snakes and Ladders where the only way to win this game is to never even pick up the dice. Right at the start, there's one ladder leading right to the win, and that's the only way to get there. Who here has ever read their Bill of Rights? Who here remembers the very first sentence? It says, and you'll find it expressed in the Constitution as well, they say that Canada is a nation founded upon the principles and the belief in the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. The supremacy of God and the rule of law. I went to my MP's office and I asked him, I said, yeah, I'd like the Bill of Rights. I grabbed this, they'll give you one. It's really nice, you can frame it, eh? I said, wow, it says here Canada is a nation founded upon the principles or the belief in the principles of the supremacy of God. Is that true? She said, sure is. I said, that's cool. I said, this tells me there's a hierarchy and God's right up at the very top. Is that true too? She said, I sure hope so. I said, me too. Who's number two? She's like, I don't know. Maybe you should see a lawyer. I was like, why should I see a lawyer when you're the one saying I don't know? I'm pretty sure this is an offer. Where do I accept it? Your Bill of Rights, the very first section, if you look at that as an offer and you accept it, you put yourself legally in a position where in this hierarchy they have designed you are number 2 to God. If they want any power over you, they've got to do one of 4 things. They've got to claim and then prove that they exist above God. They got to claim and then prove they are God. They got to claim and then prove that somehow they exist between you and God. Or they can produce a document upon the face of which can be found the verifiable signature of one deity commonly known as God. And if they can't do that, they have no claim to power. They have nothing. You have every right in the world to stand right up and claim the status of a child of God. But the moment you do that, you do accept a lot of responsibility, because then you have to look at everyone else with the same eyes.
Now, as soon as you get away from all the people and you remove yourself or segregate yourself through a private agreement or what have you, that becomes private. Now, the Governor General and the Queen, by definition, are only responsible for the public. Government is there to deal with the public for us, but they've turned everything public. As soon as you register property like land or vehicles or any of that kind of stuff, you turn that into a registered item which is in the public. If you're in the public, they assume that you're vulnerable and that you need protecting from others and from yourself. As soon as you're using all of your corporations, that's all on the public side, and that's all governed by the public, which is the government. So part of the process that I went through was to actually explicitly say, I do not want to be governed.
I got a question for you. Who here has a driver's license? Unfortunately. Okay, now who here, keep your hands in the air. Okay, put your hands down if you put your hand up higher. I see you cheating. Higher. Put your hands down if you actually read the Motor Vehicle Act before applying for your license. Huh. How do you know you have any obligation under that act to have a license if you've never even read it?
For my own protection, I'm filming it. I'm wondering what he's going to do. He's reading my affidavit of truth right now. Yeah, so I'll get back to you. He's also stated that I'm under obligation to carry photo ID, which I'm obviously not. That's the officer right there, car 77. So hopefully, yeah. There we go, car 77. Officer did not state who he was. There's my dad. Can you hold that? I don't have gloves. Here, you want them? Mine? Yeah. There's another police officer showing up. I've already informed the officers of my rights, this and that. Cold. Officer, I just want to let you know I'm activating my fee schedule. It's the middle of winter. I am cold right now, and you're harassing me right now. So my fee schedule will be activated in 3 minutes. I suggest you contact a superior officer. Read that affidavit of truth.
We're reading that right now, sir. We're trying to get...
I know, I'm just freezing cold. Okay? I'm freezing cold, so...
Okay, perfect. Here you go, Joshua. So, you don't have a driver's license, correct?
No.
And no insurance, correct? Do you have insurance?
No. I'm working on that right now, doing it through, it's not a registered motor vehicle, right? So it's not under you guys' jurisdiction. I'm not trying to cause trouble or nothing, but I am getting insurance on it. But it's through my society that I'm part of. Okay, perfect. So I don't obviously I only use it to travel around.
If you are willing to go and get a license, you are submitting an application for a license, what are you doing? Giving up a right. You're asking permission. You are asking permission to engage in a completely lawful activity. Therefore, what are you? You're a child who asks permission to engage in lawful activities. Children ask that. Mommy, can I have a cookie? If you're old enough, let's suppose for a moment, your parents own a bakery, and every day you go to that bakery and you ask the person, can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie? Sure, you can have a cookie. Don't tell your dad, here you go. Or no, your dad said you can't. But you go and you ask for a cookie, and you don't have the right to come and take one. But there comes a day where you grow up, your dad passes away, you inherit that shop. Are you asking for a cookie anymore? No. My cookies, give or find the door. You have the power then. Our buddy, this child of the province thing came up because I'm rather active in writing my letters and whatnot. Our buddy Digger, he's coming out of Park Royal, and he's got his keys. I think he was going to his car, I don't know. But let's say he is, just for the sake of the story. He's going to a car. The cops stop, and they pull up, and they say, well, who are you? Do you have your driver's license? We want to see your ID. And Digger knows his rights, eh? He's like, why are you asking me for ID when I don't have an obligation to have such a thing, but you do? I want to see your ID, I want to see your business card, I want to see your badge. And they start, well, do you have a driver's license? Are you claiming I need such a thing? And they asked him something very telling. So you're not a child of the province then? No. Thank you, sir. Have a good day. Drove right off. There is the legal status of being a child of your province because you haven't grown up enough. You go and you ask permission to engage in these lawful activities when you have remedy in the form of a claim of right that you can make. Anything you can do under license within the legislative framework, you must be able to do without license outside of that framework, or else the licensing authority is licensing unlawful activities.
This is what you give to a cop when he asks you for, like what happened to me 2 weeks ago when I got pulled over and I was asked for my driver's license. I hand him my statement of birth, and he said, well, I need license, registration, and insurance.
What they like to do, they use presumption and assumption so often, they won't even ask you a question. They come to the window, driver's license, registration, insurance. Look at them and say, apples, bananas, and pears? You're not making any sense. Like, you used a complete sentence? What is it you want? Do you have a driver's license, registration, and insurance? Or may I see it, is usually what they would ask, because they're operating upon a presumption too. You ask them, are you willing to claim under full commercial liability that I have an obligation to have such a thing in order to exercise my common law rights? Blah, blah, blah. And of course you don't.
So what you can do is simply hand them this. And it's a good faith notice which says, with all due respect, officer, I do not maintain the name of any person in your jurisdiction and am not entitled to any rights to any documents. I'm ineligible for those benefits. That's what this means. I have no rights to any documents of identification you may seek. I'm ineligible for those benefits. I provide you in good faith who maintains the birth name. The Registrar General maintains the birth name. I am a recipient and beneficiary protected by your higher powers. And what that means is talk to your bosses. I'll wait here. Just take this good faith notice, get on the radio and talk to your bosses, and you may find out that something else is going on here. Below, I humbly and peacefully provide you proof so certified who has signing authority for the birth name, which protects me as a witness. And there's the Deputy Registrar General's signature is here. There's their seal. And this is stamped. This is notarized. This is an authentic document.
When you bring this attitude, you start having more power over them because they expect you to, oh yeah. If you're not doing that, they're like, what's up with him? You're supposed to be scared and intimidated of me. Look, don't you see the gun? And you say, yeah, I see the gun. Guess what? See the smile? We have more power over them. All of their power that they have over you is a result of two things: their deception, your ignorance. Sorry to be rude, but their deception doesn't work without your ignorance. And the way to deal with it is to deal with your ignorance. Then when their deception comes, you can look at them and smile. And you can tell them, you know, I'm not a child of the province. I don't know why you're trying to apply that to me.
Look, check it. Where was I? I lost my words anyway. Now this one's for all the police officers. Every police officer listening. Oh yeah? I know you can hear me. Alright then. Look. Come. Yo. Look. I'm not getting fooled by your legalese talk. Mr. Policeman, I do know the law. You're under an oath to the Queen you swore. I'm not a criminal unless I'm breaking common law. I use my common sense, I don't consent to be governed. Do you think that I'm dense? A person's corporate fiction is a Black's Law I read. Go see Simon Goldberg, he will help you with the rest. YouTube John Harris, the illusion on the net. If you ain't broke common law, you shouldn't be in pen. Legalese is language for corporate employees, so be careful when you say that you understand police. Cause legally that means that you just stand under their authority. Enlighten yourself, take pride in yourself. Knowledge is power, spread guidance and wealth. There's no need for violence cause them sirens lead to jail. Life is what you make it, so don't choose to make it hell. Don't just be a sheep and follow everybody else. Stand out from the crowd even if it's by yourself. Say it, stand out from the crowd even if it's by yourself. Stand out from the crowd.
If we all just put our personal stuff aside, just temporarily, to work on the common thing. So for example, does anybody feel like it represents their position that it was a good idea to for your family and your children to take on the liability of private bankers' playboy mistakes? So it's like, does anybody feel like that represented their position? Step forward. I've not met anybody who feels like the bank bailout actually represents their position. So when you're looking at possibly 3/4 of the nation, 75% of Britons feeling that way, then that's not a decision of the wings. You know, that's not even a decision of the mainstream. That's a decision of the majority. What we then have is a misrepresentation case. And we can immediately, as a nation, do what the Icelandics did, basically, and turn around and say, do you know what? The British people and our children do not want to accept liability for your private bankers' mistakes. Get off our island.
When the recession hit in Iceland, they were sitting in a much worse situation than we are now. But they handled it a little differently. In fact, they completely revolted. They rebelled, they went nuts. They went down to the parliament and they started throwing rocks. In fact, what happened next, according to a Ron Paul article, was extraordinary. The belief that citizens had to pay for the mistakes of a financial monopoly, that an entire nation must be taxed to pay off private debts, was shattered, transforming the relationship between citizens and their political institutions and eventually driving Iceland's leaders to the side of their constituents. The head of state, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, refused to ratify the law that would have made Iceland citizens responsible for its bankers' debt and accepted calls for a referendum. Obviously, they're not drinking the fluoride over in Iceland, because then in March 2010, they passed a referendum with a 93% vote against repayment of the debt. The people just said no. Iceland chose the route of protecting its populace, the taxpayer, from absorbing more debt so that the global banking oligarchy could be made whole. With the support of a furious citizenry, the government launched civil and penal investigations into those responsible for the financial crisis. They went out with arrest warrants for the ex-president. They actually went and indicted the prime minister and arrested the top 3 CEOs of the top banks. That's how Iceland handled it. So, this is what else they did. They forgave the debt of 1/4 of their citizens. 25% of their citizens, they just said, no, you don't have to pay it back. And for those people that were underwater in their mortgages, over 110%, they forgave those too. Now, they didn't take that very well, the bankers that control everything. They threatened them, they intimidated them, they said when you go down, we're not going to give you any loans. But guess what? They didn't go down. In fact, they flourish. On top of it, they wrote a new constitution. This is what they did. The people of Iceland elected 25 citizens from among 522 adults not belonging to any political party, but recommended by at least 30 other citizens. This document was not the work of a handful of politicians, but was actually written on the internet. The constituents' meetings were streamed online, and the citizens could send their comments and suggestions, witnessing the document as it took shape. The Constitution that eventually emerged from this participatory democratic process will be submitted to Parliament for approval after the next elections. So they rewrote the Constitution. They actually threw the politicians out. They got people, normal people, that the other people at all decided that these were the best people, and then they put it online. I mean, talk about democratic. Okay, so how did that turn out? Everyone said it was going to go down. It was this big experiment because we really haven't heard, right? Well, I'll tell you how it turned out. They're flourishing. Their GDP has rebounded. In fact, they're doing better than the EU and most of the developing nations right now. And according to the Fitch rating on Bloomberg, the unorthodox crisis policy response in Iceland has succeeded. So the takeaway is QE1 didn't work, QE2 didn't work, and QE3 is certainly not going to work. Hyperinflating our dollar is not going to work. What will work? What did work is Iceland's program. So they sent policemen in to arrest the bankers, and they succeeded. They're doing great. So I say, let's do what Iceland did.
A difficult thing for some people to understand is what's happening today is not just an elite making a final move to take over anything. Every generation for hundreds of years has been brought up with the same elite's predecessors designing and running the show for each generation.
I think all our society is run by insane people for insane objectives. You know, and I think that's what I sussed when I was 16 and 12 way down the line, but I expressed it differently all through my life. It's the same thing I'm expressing all the time, but now I can put it into that sentence that I think we're being run by maniacs for maniacal ends, you know. I'd be very pleased to know what they think they're doing. I think they're all insane.
The elite, in fact, are simply moving their system into a new system, an updated system to suit themselves. That's a hard concept for people to grasp. They've been trained to believe things are happening at the moment by happenstance, by crisis coming out of nowhere. And here's what we must do. We must solve this problem at the time. Nothing is further from the truth.
Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. As uncertainty has grown, many banks have restricted lending. Credit markets have frozen, and families and businesses have found it harder to borrow money. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action.
I had a friend, Nick Rockefeller, okay, who was one of the Rockefeller family, and he, when I was running for governor in Nevada, he came to me, introduced himself to me through an attorney, and we became friends. We started talking about things, and I learned an awful lot from Mr. Rockefeller. And one of the things that we used to talk about was the ultimate plan of the banking industry, what they wanted to accomplish. And the goals of the banking industry, not just the Federal Reserve System, but the private banks in Germany and England, all over Italy, all over the world, they all work together. They're all central banks, and they're all part of the Communist Manifesto. You know, central banking is one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talk about America being a capitalistic country, but yet at the same time we have a central bank that plans everything for us, right? And the graduated income tax is another plank of the Communist Manifesto, right? So right there you have two major planks of the Communist Manifesto that have been brought in because of the Federal Reserve System, okay? So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government.
At a 1991 closed-door meeting of fellow internationalists, billionaire and former CFR chairman David Rockefeller praised his media allies. But his confidence that his words would not leave the room was later broken.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and restricted their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government.
In an address before the Trilateral Commission in June of 1991, David Rockefeller laid out the elite's ultimate goal. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in the last centuries.
All of the great collectivists of history have had this unified global government based on the model of collectivism as their goal, and we fought against it until recently. Now we are actually the greatest advocates of it ourselves. We don't call it tyranny, we don't call it fascism or Nazism or communism. We have a better name for it. The name they have chosen is the New World Order.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
The New World Order is a more palatable name for the Anglo-American world empire. It's the planetary domination of London, New York, Washington over the rest of the world. It's hard to get people to join that or think they have a part in it if you call it the Anglo-American world empire. If you call it the New World Order, then people in India or someplace like that or the European Union might think, well, there's something in that for us too. But that's not what it is. It's the Anglo-American New World Order. It's really the old world order. It's the British Empire morphing into the American Empire. The U.S.-British world empire is what you're going to get.
We're gonna spread happiness. We're gonna spread freedom. Obama's gonna change it. Obama's gonna lead 'em.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
I think its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity.
Do you have any regret or remorse for the human suffering, Mr. Kissinger, that you caused millions of people in Chile and Argentina and East Timor? Mr. Kissinger, I know you're not going to respond, but I don't want your New World Order, and you won't have one, Mr. Kissinger. National sovereignty will prevail, freedom will reign, nation states will survive, sir, and you will not have your New World Order, your eugenics, because we are changed and we are taking this generation back, sir. We just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy, and that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well, Rockefeller, come back. We don't want your New World Order, you know? Leave Chile right now. Leave Chile. You are not. You're killing a lot of people. You're killing a lot of people. Leave here. Leave Chile right now. Leave Chile. Leave Chile. We don't want your world government. Leave Chile right now. Leave Chile, okay?
In recent decades, worldwide social change has experienced unprecedented historical acceleration, particularly because instant mass communications, such as radio, television, and the internet, cumulatively have been stimulating a universal awakening of mass political consciousness.
Brzezinski, you will never get a New World Order. Never. National sovereignty will prevail. The New World Order is going down, sir. You can laugh. Wake up, people. Wake up. Research the New World Order. This is important. Look it up. Investigate it.
The resulting widespread rise in worldwide populist activism is proving inimical to external domination of the kind that prevailed in the age of colonialism and imperialism. Persistent and highly motivated populist resistance of politically awakened and historically resentful peoples to external control has proven to be increasingly difficult to suppress.
The truth of your world government has now been exposed. We know you are ruthless. We know you are evil. To David Rockefeller, to the Rothschild representatives here, to the Queen of the Netherlands, to all of you, we tell you, you are not our queens. You are not our kings. You are not our gods. We do not belong to you. We are not your slaves. We stand as free humans, have stood since the beginning of time against the strong men, against the thugs, against the bullies. We will defeat your world government. We will defeat world taxation. We will defeat your control grid. God is on our side. You will and you are failing now. Your new world order will fall. Humanity will defeat you. The answer to 1984 is 1776.
What is the consent of the governed? Natural rights are inherent to your humanity and the source of your sovereignty as a free individual. Just as slaves have the moral and legal right to leave those enslaving them, just as the states have the moral and legal right to leave a union that violates the Constitution that binds them, so too you have the moral right to live without a government when it breaks its own laws. The federal government claims your consent through the Constitution. The Constitution is a social contract that binds the American people to their government. Did you freely consent to this? I don't know anybody who did. So since none of us consented to the Constitution, either the government stays within the confines of the Constitution, or we can ignore or change the government. This view, called the consent of the governed, was widely and openly accepted by the framers. They gave us a Constitution which defines, limits, and constrains the government. This is why adherence to the Constitution by all government is so crucial to preserving and retaining our freedoms. The Constitution formalizes the relationship between sovereign people and sovereign states and the federal government. When the Constitution is ignored, so is our sovereignty. And if we can't avoid a government to which we never gave consent and which violates the Constitutions, so will our freedoms be ignored.
Everybody withdraws their consent from a different way. But ultimately, you can go as far as you want with it. The withdrawal of consent is it's biblical. Everything I read over the last 2 years, basically, shows one nexus, one cross. And that cross is consent.
One way to take control of the streets pretty quickly is either to use water cannon or to get the army on the streets.
No, the way we police in the UK, the way we police is by consent. We want police able to work with their communities to ensure that they can deal with the disorder that is taking place.
America polices in a different way to we do over here. Here we police by consent. That consent has been shown in swathes in recent days with the support we've had from members of the public. America police by force. We don't want to do that in this country.
All governments must maintain power through consent, not coercion.
Everywhere you look, the concept of consent in all their treaties, in all their documents, the word consent. Consent is the #1 issue in all contracts. Without a meeting of the minds, there's no contract at any level. So when I say withdraw consent, I'm saying you have to do something. You can't stay silent. Silence is consent.
Silence is consent. Because while we're silent on these impositions, the impositions just keep going on and on and on. By our silence, we are acquiescing, even agreeing to them being imposed.
Now, if we don't do something, we have acquiesced. Acquiescence is, hey, I'm going to come over and sit on your lap in 5 minutes. And if I say that in front of these witnesses and he says nothing, in 5 minutes from now I go over there and sit on his lap. He's really got no beef with me because he didn't protest. He didn't say no. He acquiesced. He actually, in the presence of witnesses, gave me permission to come sit on his lap because he didn't protest. He didn't say no, I don't want you to do that. That's not the right thing to do.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
If we don't rise up and do something about it now, we deserve whatever the bankers give us. We've acquiesced. It is time for us to unite and to do something. Now, as far as I'm concerned, because I have 9 children and 7 grandchildren, I don't want on my conscience that I understood this stuff and didn't work hard to stop it from continuing, because their future plans for our country are not very good. Their future plans for our prosperity and for our freedoms are not very good. I don't want it on my conscience, so I'm trying to work hard to bring change. What about you?
This generation today, the ones who are alive today, we are the generation that's going through the biggest changes in history, according to even Rockefeller himself, since the Industrial Revolution. It's the end of one phase of a long-term plan. And out of this comes a new world order, a different order from the previous one, where people technically were working for themselves, would choose their own employment and so on. The new world order is a planned system, a planned economy, a planned population. So it's up to us. It's not up to the next generation to change this. We're the only ones who can possibly do the changing. And it's either really the rights to go into an uncertain future, which is what life should really be, where we decide for ourselves where we want to go individually and collectively, or allow ourselves to be dumb animals, creatures who are guided by those who have decided they are the masters of our destiny.
This is a list of things that you would do if you wanted to subvert a country. This is Marxism. Let's go through the list. The creation of racism offences. Tick. Continual change to create confusion. Tick. The teaching of sex and homosexuality to children. Tick. The undermining of schools and teachers' authority. Tick. Huge immigration to destroy national identity. Tick. The promotion of excessive drinking. Tick twice. Emptying the churches. Tick. An unreliable legal system with bias against the victim of crime. Tick. Dependency on the state or state benefits. Tick. Control and dumbing down of the media. Tick. And encouraging the breakdown of families. Tick. So what's our plan? We come back to the basics. Nobody on this planet has the right or the authority to tell anybody what to do without their consent. That is an uncontestable fact. We are governed by consent, and we are policed by consent. We are withdrawing our consent. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in lawful rebellion.
We can't sort this out with violence. Because if we sort this out with violence, violence will always ensue. We have to do this peacefully. And the way we do it peacefully is learning the rules of the game. This is what I entered into. The only way to get rid of this once and for all is to sacrifice the person. To sacrifice the person is to remove that person completely. That means the birth certificate has to be destroyed. And it can be done. I've seen a way of doing it. Massive implications, but it can be done. And I am going to do it. Because I am not living in this society 1 minute longer than I have to and watch my fellow human beings suffer under it. I will find a way to get out of this, and I will succeed. The reason being is because what I'm doing is right.
How do we get to this point, though? How do we get them to recognize that they're the nanny and we have grown up and they have no more power as nanny over us? It's about how we treat them, about how we act. If we're shitting our pants, pardon the language, ladies and sensitive guys, but if we're pooping our drawers, Nanny has a right and a duty to put diapers on us, and she will do that. If you're throwing a tantrum, Nanny has the power and the right to come grab you, throw you in your room until you settle down. If you're rebellious, Nanny's got a right to put limits upon you as long as you're in the house. Nanny is tired. She wants us to stop rebelling. If you get to the point where you say, Nanny, I'm not rebelling anymore, I'm just old enough now and I'm in charge of the house, and you're not telling me what time I'm going to bed. I'm telling you I'm going out all night, I'll be back at 7, you'll have breakfast ready. You take power over them when you act within that capacity.
All of the great movements of history have always started with simple concepts. The freedom movement in America and in the world right now is in very serious need of some simple concepts, some simple principles. And so the first step toward reversing this drift toward global, collectivist, tyrannical government is to know what we believe in, what is freedom, and be able to define it, to be able to defend it, to be able to argue against the collectivists and say this system is better than that for this reason, and this reason. And then finally, the ultimate question is, well, who's going to do this? It's easy to become despondent, discouraged, and say, well, nobody cares. My neighbor is out cutting his grass. He's a good guy. We talk about baseball. We talk about the weather. We can talk about the latest movies. But he doesn't want to talk about politics. He doesn't care about the economy. He just doesn't want to become informed, and he certainly doesn't want to take any personal responsibility for monitoring and changing the system. So how are you going to fight this great drift toward global government with all of these powerful people at the top and nobody on the street cares? The answer is that all movements of history have always been determined by less than 3% of the population. You don't need everybody out there. In fact, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. Never happened before in history, and it won't happen now, and certainly won't happen in the future. 3% or less of the population are always the movers and the shakers. If you can reach 3% of the people who really care and who really have the mindset and who are willing to make the sacrifices and the dedication to this task, it can be done. And the guy next door will continue to push his lawnmower, and he'll go whichever way the system goes. It's always been that way. So we don't need to be discouraged by the fact that not everybody is taking an interest.
A lot of the people in the freedom movement, they're very rebellious towards everything that they're doing. We want to get away from that. We don't want to be in permanent conflict with these people. They want us in conflict. That generates the revenue. We want to find the place of peace and the place of abundance.
Those that are in banking have said to me, well, hey, are you really going to be able to change things? Perhaps not change the current state of play, but in terms of change the way that I and others exist, yeah, of course. It's not a case of can we do it, it's a case of we're doing it. It's being done. Right here, right now, in this moment, it's being done. So it's really a question of one's will. And if your will and your intent and purpose is there, you make it happen. You don't ask for anyone else to do it. You don't go pleading and begging for this to happen and abdicate that responsibility to someone else. You take responsibility yourself, you step up to plate, and you make it happen.
Do you want to make the world a better place for your children? If the answer is yes, then you have to do something about it. No one else is going to come along and do it for you. You've got to do it yourself. And it starts with letting go of the fear.
We want remedy. We want our power back. We want our remedy, and we want to hold these people to the... We don't want to beat them up. We want abundance. We want peace. We don't want a life of conflict with these people, and we shouldn't have to dig through the shit they manufacture in order to find the diamonds of our freedom.
I think if we have a realistic view of the political process, and we know that it takes sometimes a generation or two for really important changes to happen, and if we understand that and accept it, and accept our role in being responsible for making it happen, then you can go to sleep at night and say, by golly, I'm really doing something about this, and I am making a difference, and it will happen.
You know, is it really the best you can do to become a debt slave like your parents? and then slip into retirement and learning that you've got no pension, that all those years paying into it was a waste of time because they were just going to rip you off in the end anyway and wheel you into a hospital ward and try and kill you with pharmaceuticals as quickly as possible? Is that really the best it gets? No, it's not. It's not. The best it gets is freedom, peace and abundance for every man, woman and child, living in harmony with nature, in mutual cooperation with each other everywhere on the planet. That's the best it can get.
The martyrs of history were not fools, and our honored dead who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay, there is a point beyond which they must not advance.
To be truly free is deceptively easy or almost impossible. We recoil at the horror of acknowledging our enslavement, but the walls, the bars, the guns and the guards can never encircle or hold down the liberty of the people, and we can only be truly caged behind prison bars that we refuse to see. Wake up!
Don't tread on us, we're not afraid. You work for us, we're not your slaves. Don't tread on us, you crossed the line, so you will pay for all your crimes. After a long train of abusive and dissipation, now we've lost our patience. Yeah, you're trying to kill our constitution, to kill our pride. Now the wood is dry. Don't tread on us, we're not afraid. You work for us, we're not your slaves. Don't tread on us, you crossed the line, so you will pay for all your crimes. You keep on pushing us into desperation. You'll only fuel our determination. Yeah, it's been way too long since the last time, 1776. Now we're done with your tricks. Yeah, don't tread on us. Don't tread on us. We're not afraid. You work for us. We're not your slaves. Don't tread on us. You crossed the line, so you will pay for all your crimes. Don't tread on us. Don't tread on us. Now it's payback time.
Fundamental 3 things you should have learned. 1, you are not a person, you have a person. It exists in association with you. Statutes are not laws. They do not apply to you, they apply to your person. And finally, believe it or not, you want your freedom, you want to become a free man on the land, you have to treat these people with compassion, regardless of what they've done to you, and I know how difficult that can be.
Don't tread on us. We're not afraid. You work for us. We're not your slaves. Don't tread on us. You crossed the
6. I am not a number. I am a free man.